Good afternoon. As Hurricane Leslie approaches and Bermuda and Bermudians prepare for the big blow this weekend, it reminds me how in February 2008, Parliament and government were warned that there was on the horizon an approaching economic storm, and that Bermudians should batten down the hatches and get prepared. That warning went unheeded, and we were not prepared. So Bermudians have been consigned to what I would call a leaky boat tossed in a stormy economic sea ever since that time. Today, we report on the state of that leaky boat and how we can plug the leaks and get back on course. Now, it has been customary at this time of year for us to review the Bermuda economy for the first half of the year. The issue of jobs is foremost in most people's minds. The loss of one's job, finding a new job, creating new jobs, the risk of losing the job you already have, or the risk of losing that second job that enabled you to make ends meet or pay for Johnny or Jenny's college tuition, something some of my constituents have told me about. These are the top issues of our time here in Bermuda, issues that scream for real solutions. The role of government is not to create jobs by hiring more people, because the money to pay for those people ultimately comes from taxes. In Bermuda, wealth, growth, and prosperity cannot be created that way. The proper role of government is to create an environment that encourages people in the private sector to invest capital in Bermuda, and in so doing, create more jobs and increase prosperity for all. It is that increased prosperity that will provide the government with more revenues to fulfill its mandated functions, plus pay down the debt. Inconsistent policies by government have caused an erosion of trust. Businesses are reluctant to invest their capital in Bermuda under such circumstances, and without that investment, we cannot grow jobs. So let us not forget, when we analyze the various sectors of the Bermuda economy, we do so not just for the sake of analysis, but to seek and find answers to how we can create more jobs in Bermuda and how Bermudians can look to the future with confidence and security. Last week, the Minister of Finance declared that the recovery had begun. It is not responsible for a finance minister to make such a declaration that is not backed up with hard data. So today, we will look at some of that hard data regarding how Bermuda and the various economic sectors are performing, and how this performance has to change if we are going to bring back job opportunities for Bermudians. We will also touch on a few points on what we would do to help make that happen. Now, to move on to the next section, I'm going to invite my colleague Sylvan to refer to some of these graphs. So,
thank you, Paul. As leaders of the country, it is government's responsibility to set national objectives and then make plans to achieve these objectives. As the future government of Bermuda, today we will talk about some of those objectives relating to our economy. First, let us do a brief review. The information in the two graphs I will be referring to was taken from government's own published prospectus for the latest bond issue, where government borrowed $472 million from capital markets. The first graph shows Bermuda's GDP, which is a measurement of the country's economic activity, or in other words, it shows how well we are doing economically. As you can see, Bermuda's GDP growth of -2% was the worst when compared to the other islands in the graph. The second graph shows Bermuda's 2011 GDP when compared to countries who are our major trading partners. As you can see, the only country with a worse GDP than Bermuda is the UK. All other countries have shown positive GDP growth. Keep in mind, these aren't my numbers. These figures come straight from the Bermuda Ministry of Finance. In a recent address, the Prime Minister of Antigua and Bermuda stated that all of Bermuda's economic woes are solely the result of the global recession. However, we have noted that in 2011, his country's GDP actually grew by 2%, as opposed to Bermuda's GDP, which shrank by 2%. The truth is this: the government's own data confirms the OBA's long-stated position that there are powerful factors stifling the growth of Bermuda's economy, and that these factors have a Made in Bermuda label firmly stamped on them. This current government is not going to fix these homegrown factors that are holding Bermuda's economy back if they fail to first acknowledge that they even exist. The world outside of our shores is not going to bail Bermuda out. It will be up to us to fix this situation and get our economy right on track.
Thanks, Sylvan. Have the next one, please. This graph shows international company formation, with the trend shown by the downward sloping black arrow. This is a negative trend that needs to be reversed. The OBA sets as one of its objectives to decisively change this trend in the direction shown by the rising red arrow. Bermuda needs a change in government to restore confidence and trust that international business used to have in the government. That lack of trust breeds uncertainty, which is the biggest enemy of business formation, and by extension, job creation. Next graph, please. Now this graph shows the long-term trend in tourist air arrivals. This graph shows second quarter air arrivals for the last 31 years. A clear declining trend. This is a very difficult thing to reverse because it's so well entrenched. That long-term decline corresponds with the steady contraction of jobs for Bermudians in tourism. This trend will not be turned around by half measures like a new tourism board, which is not a tourism authority, or the latest advertising campaign. It will only be corrected by the OBA approach, which requires strategic and structural action by government, like the formation of an independent tourism authority, which will employ professionals who will be held accountable for their performance, along with an approach that is centered on the requirements of investors of new capital in tourism. Hotels in Bermuda must make a profit if the present ones are to survive and the new ones are to be built. But jobs of Bermudians in tourism, jobs for Bermudians in tourism depend on hotels being profitable. The OBA approach to tourism, the tourism problem, is a real-world business problem and a real-world business approach. We have the next graph, please. Right. The next graph shows retail sales. The downward trend shown by the black arrow needs to be changed decisively in the direction of the red arrow. We will institute policies and plans to change the trajectory of retail sales in Bermuda. Now, it's hard to grow retail sales with fewer and fewer customers. We will increase the number of customers with our policies to expand international business and increase tourism and increase the number of Bermudians that have disposable income because they are working. Increasing retail sales will support more jobs for Bermudians. Next graph, please. This graph shows the value of new construction projects started. Again, the black arrow shows a sharp drop in construction. The OBA will provide a plan to decisively change the negative trajectory in this industry. Such a trajectory change will provide new jobs and business opportunities for many Bermudians. Many people who formerly worked in hotels turned to construction as tourism declined. The double whammy of weak tourism and weak construction has had a devastating impact on jobs. Add to that double whammy softness in international business, and you get the unemployment rate we have in Bermuda today. OBA redevelopment plans for all of Hamilton and St. George will address this issue. Next one, please. Now this graph shows the underperformance and trajectory of government's current account balance. And what this means is whether the government has sufficient revenues to pay its day-to-day expenses, like a household's ability to pay electricity, food, rent, and other monthly expenses. This graph shows that up until 2007, government was able to pay its day-to-day expenses. However, after that, there has been a yearly deficit, which has deteriorated dramatically thereafter. This trajectory is unsustainable. It is critical that this deficit trend is reversed. OBA's objective is to change this trajectory to where government is able to pay its current expenses, just like we would expect any household to do. This change is highly dependent upon the other changes that we have described earlier. Now, reduction of wasteful government spending is the one key factor we have not mentioned so far. The OBA will fulfill its promise to cut wasteful government spending. Now, I have heard some critics ask, well, what would you cut? As though that was some sort of trick question. Well, one government statistic recently jumped out at me as an indicator of the amount of fat in this government. In the years between 2007 and 2011, the number of GP cars on the road has soared from 91 to 247. And this is during a period when the Minister of Finance was supposed to be cutting back. This tells me that there is a whole lot of wastefulness throughout the public sector available to be cut by a new OBA government. However, I've said it before and I'll say it again. An OBA government will not lay off civil servants. The fact is, we will ensure the sustainability of government employees' jobs by cutting wasteful spending. Next graph, please. This graph shows the trend in government debt. This is well documented, spiraling into the stratosphere. This trajectory is also clearly unsustainable, currently costing Bermudians $234,000 per day in interest. It is crucial to decisively alter this trend in direction, as the red arrow indicates. It is reckless and desperate for the government to try to justify their bad record on public debt by claiming this represents investments in infrastructure. One look at our crumbling roads, rusting ferries, and broken buses will confirm this claim is nonsense. The reduction of public debt is an explicit objective of an OBA government. The achievement of this objective is highly dependent upon all the other changes that we have described earlier. Now, John Woolridge's wonderful song, Proud to be Bermudian, has come to the fore at a crucial time in our history. We Bermudians have never in our lifetimes faced economic challenges of this magnitude. During canvassing, many of my colleagues and I have encountered widespread hopelessness and despondency among our people. Where is the Bermuda that was the mouse that roared? Where is that national optimism and pride? Where is that confidence that enabled us to be players on a world stage in spite of being just a dot on the map? Well, it's still here with all of us, just beneath the surface. In the history of human events, action is always preceded by attitude. We at the OBA intend to change our national attitude. So we say, take heart, Bermuda. Change is coming. And with that, I'll address any of your questions.
Mr. Richards, you talked about, you, I guess, sought to put down fears that civil servants' jobs will be, they will be laid off under an OBA government, but you said that you targeted GP cars as a fact you would cut. Surely, if you take power, cutting cars would be the least you can do. You have to do more than that to get us out of the hole we're in. So what will you cut?
The GP cars was used as an example and as an indicator. I don't mean to portray the message that if you cut down the number of GP cars, the deficit is going to go away. But it's an indicator of a mindset that is in government, that it doesn't matter if you waste that taxpayers' money. And we feel that there's a lot of waste in government, wasteful procedures, processes, etc. We won't know all the things that are in there until we become the government. But this is just an indicator of the kind of mindset, the kind of practices that have been going on in spite of the fact that the public has been told that they're tightening their belts. But if this is the kind of behavior that you do when you're tightening your belts, Lord help us if you're slackening your belt. So that's what I'm trying to say here.
You had a graph that had 30 years of downward spiral in the air arrivals,
yes,
as an example of what tourism was turning into. 30 years, 13 or 15 of those years or 16 of those years were yours, or the UBP's. Why don't you pass that criticism a bit further around?
I'm just saying that we have a long-term trend. It's an economic trend. It doesn't matter who the heck was the government. This is an economic trend. And the point that is being made here is that when a trend is so entrenched, so established, it's going to take a major type of, a strategic major type approach to turn it around. The types of things that we've seen so far have been just, if you like, tweaking. And tweaking is not going to do it. We have to have a major change in how we do business. And yes, a lot of these numbers were from a former government. Tourism has become, quite frankly, has become uncompetitive. We have an uncompetitive tourism product. And this graph proves that. So, you know, I'm not here to throw stones or to ascribe blame. What we have here is an economic problem that affects all Bermudians, and we have recognized it and say, you know, we just can't keep doing things the old way and expect to change a trend that goes back 31 years.
You mentioned the international company formations.
Yes.
It seems to be in percentages, right? So the percentages of new formations, sorry,
It's
increases on
down, yeah.
Right. But that means it's still going, the absolute numbers are still going up, right?
Yeah, it's year-over-year percentage change. So if you have a year-over-year percentage change, the numbers have to be going, the actual numbers have to be going down. It's not a percentage change of a percentage change, it's a percentage change.
All right.
What would you do about international companies? What's your main thrust?
Our main thrust is twofold. First, we believe that the problem that we're having with international companies is a result of a lack of confidence in the government. There's been a lot of flip-flopping by the Paula Cox finance ministry, and that has really unnerved international business. And any business, whether international or local, has to be able to feel that they can rely on the government. The government has to be dependable. You know, the thing about governments is that they don't have to be spectacular. They just have to be dependable. And this government hasn't been dependable, hasn't been reliable. So people say, well, I don't know what's coming next. Because of that, they've held back. So that's the first point. The second point is that we have not allocated the resources in government, I believe, appropriately. We have an industry, international business, that comprises of over 75% of GDP, yet the amount of money we spend on promoting it is minute. That will change on an OBA government. And there is a lack of sort of coordination as well in our efforts to bring new business to Bermuda. But the two most important aspects are confidence in government. And the way you do that is to be reliable, to be transparent, and also resources dedicated to promoting ourselves as an offshore financial jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Tourism. You said the tourism authority, the PLP government is saying that theirs is similar to, the tourism board is similar to other jurisdictions.
It is not.
Okay, my question is, how is it not similar? And they also say that the OBA hasn't said what yours would look like.
Well, there are tourism authorities all throughout the Caribbean. So this is not as though we're sort of saying that we need to invent something really new here. If you want to know how a tourism authority operates, you can look at several of the islands in the Caribbean. They all have tourism authorities. The key issue with the tourism authority is that you get the politicians out of tourism. That's the key thing. The people who run tourism will comprise of entities that have skin in the game. Hotels, for instance, the government will have skin in the game as well. But the people who are going to be running, who have the most to lose in tourism have to be involved in a very specific way. But most importantly, and the big difference between a tourism authority and this tourism board that we have here is that the tourism authority will retain professionals who will be compensated based on their performance. When you have politicians involved, you know, their performance and their compensation are in no way connected. Therefore, they can go ahead and do a whole lot of nonsense and not have to pay a price. And that's the difference.